Welcome back to Beyond Revenue, the podcast where we unpack the real stories behind revenue growth. I'm your host, Michael Jäger. Season 3 looks a little different. After more than 50 episodes across our first 2 seasons, one thing became very clear: our audience wants depth and practical insights, not theory. That's why this season we introduce a new 20-minute format, shorter, sharper, highly focused. Every practice is designed to give you experience-based lessons you can actually apply in your own go-to-market motions. Each guest this season shares 2 tactics they actually led to success and one where they generate some learnings. Today's episode is all about orchestration of enterprise deals, what really takes to move complex multi-stakeholder opportunities from interest to decision. I'm very excited to be joined by Thomas Cser, Head of DACH Revenue Growth at Stripe, a leader who has orchestrated some of the most complex enterprise deals across EMEA. Thomas, very great to have you.
Thanks, Michael. Good to see you. And I love your new format, shorter and sharper. It's somewhat resonating with me very well. I always try to be sharp and short. Great to see you again.
So to set the stage, can you give us a little bit overview of your role today at Stripe and what your responsibilities are across the DACH region?
Yeah, sure. At Stripe, I essentially lead the German, Swiss, and Austrian region and our revenue and growth here. I'm fully accountable for our results and the satisfaction of our customers. We call them users. And we have over 200,000 in DACH alone, where we added 100,000 just last year.
Nice. Looking back across your career from SAP throughout Salesforce, ServiceNow, and now Stripe, what has changed most in your enterprise deals from there then to today?
If you look back at the trajectory from the big bang ERP implementations of the early 2000s, like with SAP, to what I would call the API first developer-centric era of today, for instance, at Stripe, the mechanics of enterprise deals have fundamentally inverted. And I would see like 4 key shifts in how we do business now compared to, and that's scary, but it's like 20 years ago. Back in the days, 20 years ago, a deal was like a 7-year commitment to a single rigid all-in-one suite like SAP. Today, the best of breed strategy has won. Enterprises now buy highly specialized primitives. What do I mean with that? ServiceNow, for instance, for workflows, Salesforce for CRM, Stripe for financial infrastructure. And then they stick these things together. So that's one of the 4 things I see. The second one, in the SAP era, the CIO was the sole gatekeeper. That was the ultimate decision maker. Today, you have buying committees. They are massive. They are decentralized. Procurement now shares a seat with security or legal or privacy. A deal can be, perfect for the business, but then it dies in a security review. And I've seen that over and over. A third element is that we moved from perpetual licenses, like huge upfront checks. And I remember the days where we had like a 20 million license deal and a 30 million consulting deal kind of packed together and kind of signed off. We moved that to a predictable subscription and now to to usage-based consumption models. And that is, of course, a big shift in how you do enterprise selling. And back 20 years ago, 2006, integration was a kind of service line item that potentially costs 3 times the software. In 2026, integration is like the competitive advantage. So when I'm selling Stripe or ServiceNow, the developer experience is important or is as important as the executive ROI. If your APIs are difficult or your documentation is poor, the technical team most probably will veto the deal. So in other words, we no longer sell features, we sell connectivity and speed to market and real business impact.
Nice. I think that gives us great context. Let's jump straight into, I'm always calling it the icebreaker questions, before we go into the tactics. So when people talk about enterprise deals, they often focus on deal size. What's the real source of complexity that most teams underestimate?
Yeah, I mean, deal size is a proxy, but the real source of complexity, kind of most sales teams really underestimate, is internal alignment debt. You
Mm.
know, what do I mean with that? Sales promises a solution, but the solution architect, they just haven't kind of vetted the API limitations. When the kind of statement of work doesn't match the pitch, the deal collapses. Latest when you come to the technical win stage. Another one, for instance, is teams underestimate how long it actually takes to get internal approvals for anything non-standard in your legal terms. But enterprise customers simply demand that. Or post sale ownership in a land and expand model. There is the friction between sales, kind of who wants the commission, and customer success, who really has to implement all of that, creates quite a silo. So if the implementation plan isn't like airtight before signature, the customer churns before you can even think about expansion.
What's for you an early warning sign that tells you a large enterprise deal is drifting, even if it looks great on the, let's say, on the forecast?
There are dozens, I would say. Let's try to list like 4 or 5. So one is I've seen very often is kind of what I call executive silence. You are best friends with the manager, but the actual economic buyer hasn't been on a call for a month or so. That's usually a very, very early warning signal of something going south. The other one is something I would call like the black hole review. If you look into your security and legal docs and they have set untouched for the last 2-3 weeks, that is an early warning. If there is back office silence on your last mile closing the deal, that means there is zero internal urgency. That's a warning flag for sure. Another one I see very commonly is what I call like technical ghosting. When the user or customer and their technical teams stop asking hard questions, everything feels just too smooth, then they've likely or very often pivoted to an internal kind of build or potentially even a competitor. Champions, for instance, if your champion says, they are socializing the deck, that actually means they are still looking internally to find budget and owners and things like that. So that is often a kind of warning sign of missing a real support on the user side. And then, of course, what often happens, given that these enterprise sales cycles are long, is that the enterprise customers' kind of quarterly goals change, and your deal just didn't adjust to that. So, if you are the top priority in every quarter, especially when you're driving larger enterprise deals, you have the probability to be just dead as you stand.
In one sentence, what separates a well-orchestrated enterprise deal from a chaotic one?
Okay, in one sentence, that's a tricky one. Maybe I'll need two, but let's remain to stay sharp and focused, right? A well-orchestrated deal is a kind of precision military operation where you control the calendar, whereas a chaotic one is a kind of hope-based prayer circle where your champion is actually just a fan with no budget. Was that one sentence?
Like
hopefully.
Very well said. So let's get started into your tactic one, which actually worked and which led to success. What was it concretely? So please share that with us.
Yeah. A tactic that I've seen consistently working well in enterprise selling was going vertical. Now, what do I mean with that? Maybe a step back. Like a lot of software companies begin with a horizontal story, right? They have a broad platform, broad use case, they have broad market appeal, but at some point that kind of stops winning or slows down the growth. And enterprise buyers simply want to know one thing: do you really understand my industry, my economics, my constraints, and my problems? And that's when you need to start vertical, meaning you need to become industry specific. And what I've seen is that real winners kind of start to build that vertical muscle. They bring in industry talents first. They start to speak the customer's language. They create very, very specific industry use cases and then, of course, product expansions that are kind of deeply relevant to each of these sectors. And the moment that happens, the sales motion can get stronger, sales is reaccelerating, and credibility rises, the differentiation improves, conversation shifts from kind of generic software to business impact. And that is something I've seen playing out again and again very well.
Nice. What is the complexity in this, right? Because not a trivial task, right? You just said you're bringing the winner champions for the verticals, but what's the real complexity in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, the company needs to adopt. So, the kind of what I've seen is that the complexity was that the product was often horizontal and the buying process was not. So on the one hand side, every software company wants to scale, and they want repeatability and broad value proposition and all of that. On the other side, like enterprise customers evaluate the solution through a very industry specific lens. And that then starts to create a few layers of complexity. First, the messaging is and remains too generic. Kind of what sounds potentially powerful internally often lands as a kind of vague external something because customers cannot immediately connect it to their world.
Sure.
Second, the sales cycle becomes harder to control. More stakeholders get involved. Each of them look at the solution through a very different industry and functional perspective. And without real vertical depth, the vendor needs to kind of re-explain the value from scratch over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And third and last, but certainly not least, the product and the go-to-market teams have to make some very difficult choices. You cannot verticalize for every industry at once, right? So the real challenge is deciding where to focus, how far to tailor, and how to build enough specialization to win without, however, completely kind of destroying your scalability. So I think these are like the three main challenges I've seen.
They will reveal quite fast if you're not in depth on their topics, right? And I think to really build the trust by showing their understanding, you need to adapt completely. Yeah, I understand the point, but really like the example. I think that's very helpful, and I think a lot of companies do that not in the right way, right? Even so, sometimes they build a vertical, but with not with 100% going in, and I think you can notice that quite fast. Let's go to the next tactic. Yeah, I think the first one was already great. What was the second one which actually worked?
Yeah, I would call it like focus. Another tactic that really works well. Be very clear on your product market fit. Define your ICP, your ideal customer profile carefully, and then stay very disciplined. The biggest mistake I've seen is that many companies are spreading too early. That going global, they go, to crazy regions. You have to remember if you move, for instance, from US, where you have one language and all of that, to Europe with many languages, but then you move to Asia Pacific, where you have, in Europe, you sit into a plane and within 1.5 hours, you are with every user. If you want to do the same in Asia Pacific, your flight time goes to 4 or 5 hours every time you sit on a plane. So this type of thing, losing that focus is one of the biggest mistakes. They go global too fast, they travel constantly, and they chase every opportunistic deal.
Sure.
And that creates a lot of noise, but it certainly doesn't create the scale you wish for. And you have also no chance to develop patterns of success. What you want to see is repeatability. So I would say in enterprise selling, focus always beats motion.
Yeah, like it, because I think growing efficiently and scalable is the key there, and it only works with focus. But when you go into, right, because it's hard to say no to opportunities, right? If you're opportunistic, right, how long does it take to really pay off or to really generate impact with that focus? So, right, you need the management buying to have the long breath around that as well.
Yeah, totally. And again, we are talking enterprise level deals here, so it's usually a few quarters, not a few weeks. You often see early signals quite quickly, like you see that you have better conversations, you have a clearer qualification, you have less kind of wasted efforts, you see stronger win patterns, hopefully. But real impact typically shows up after 2 or 3 quarters, once the focus is consistent enough to improve pipeline quality, conversion, and then team execution. And that's really where kind of most companies fail. They quit too early. They declare the strategy right, but they do not stay disciplined long enough for the compounding effect to show. Yeah. So, as mentioned, this is like relevant in enterprise running where, you have 9 to 12 month sales cycles to have by default.
Yeah, I would say they even quit too early because they don't understand their cycle, right? Quite often they live from quarter to quarter, even so they have 9, 12 months average cycles around it. But the board puts so much pressure sometimes on them, and then they not steer consistently. But yeah, I really like that. And I think it's something we always need to be reminded again and again. Focus is the topic. I liked how you started that tactic. Let's move into a tactic which didn't work well for you.
Yeah, so one approach that often does not deliver the expected result is kind of the over-orchestration of deals with just too many people involved too early. I mean, one, it's great if you have so many people with you who are able to support, and it can look sophisticated internally with lots of stakeholders, lots of meetings, lots of activity. But the flip side is that it just often creates too much noise. It slows momentum, it confuses ownership. So instead of kind of moving the deal forward, the customer experiences a swarm of people and a very unclear kind of storyline because every person might just say something differently. So as much as enterprise deals do need orchestration, they certainly do not need the kind of theater. So the best results usually come from a small, sharp team with a very strong AE in the middle, with very clear roles, tight alignment, and then creating a kind of consistent narrative. They are making sure every user or customer is receiving in a same kind of programmatic way.
Sure. I remember a couple of years ago we talked about the big deals you manage with real big buying and selling teams. How does this lesson influence how you sell now in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, it makes this whole topic of simplification much, much harder. In 26, I'm far more deliberate about who gets involved, when they get involved, and what role they actually play. I try not to confuse kind of activity with progress. More people, more meetings, or more internal choreography just doesn't make the deal stronger by default. It actually makes it often slower and less clear. Sure. So for me, the lesson is pretty simple. Keep the team lean, keep ownership explicit, keep the narrative consistent, and kind of add people when it clearly increases the chance of moving the customer forward.
Nice. Thank you very much for sharing that lessons. I think for me, they're already very valuable, I guess, for the audience as well. Let me recap. Yeah, please, Thomas, correct me if I recap the wrong way. Tactic 1 was, if you're a big enterprise, going vertical can really help to boost trust, to boost sales, and boost performance. So because enterprise sellers or enterprise buyers only want one thing, they want to understand, if you understand them, their challenges, their pains, what they actually need. And the winner companies, they bring in the real vertical champions who can really deliver, or who really speaks the customer language, and then can deliver this trust and win them over.
It's about business impact, and that is by default industry specific. Yeah.
Right. Tactic number 2 is, as you said, focus, or ruthless focus. Yeah. Be very clear on who you're selling to. Have a very clear defined ICP and even buyer personas, and really manage against them. Don't be distracted by all the opportunities out there, because that's the only way you can not only scale efficient and then perform in the right way, but you can learn from it and develop patterns which you then can apply and even grow further and faster. And the last, which didn't work, or which is something you learned over time in your big deals, is over-orchestrating deals. Too many people involved, especially too early in the deal, generate a lot of noise, even so it can look very sophisticated to the clients, but it slows down the momentum, and it even slows down the deals, where the learning here is go in with a very dedicated team of experts with a very strong AE, keep it small but focused, and drive the deal as fast as possible. Anything to add here?
That's a very sharp and short summary, Michael. Well done.
I try my best. So that's it for today's episode of Beyond Revenue. Huge thank you, Thomas Cser, for joining us, and thank you for listening in. If you found that episode useful, share it with your revenue leaders, share it with your friends. Hopefully they learn how to navigate throughout complex enterprise deals. New episodes drop every Friday in English, 20 minutes, real tactics, real lessons. I'm Michael Jäger, and see you next time. Thomas, thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. Always a pleasure.